Willa Thompson's hands trembled as she signed the marriage contract, knowing that in 3 months she would walk down the aisle to marry a man she had never met face to face. The arrangement had been orchestrated by her father, Gregory Thompson, and the billionaire's lawyers over the course of 6 weeks. Her family's pharmaceutical company was drowning in debt after a failed product launch, and this marriage was the only lifeline that could save it. The billionaire in question, Harrison Blackthorne, was 58 years old, twice divorced, and reportedly willing to invest $20 million into Thompson Pharmaceuticals in exchange for a young wife to accompany him to social events. Willa was 26, practical and desperate enough to agree. She set down the pen and looked at her father across the mahogany desk in his study. His face had aged 10 years in the past 6 months, lines carved deep around his mouth and eyes. "It's done," she said quietly. "Thank you, Willa. You're saving everything your grandfather built." His voice cracked and she had to look away. "I know, Dad." She stood, smoothing her navy dress. "I need some air. I'm going for a walk." The October afternoon was crisp in Manhattan, leaves skittering across the sidewalk as Willa walked without direction. She found herself in Central Park, drawn to the familiar paths she had jogged along since college. Her mind spun with images of what her life would become. Harrison Blackthorne lived in the Hamptons, collected modern art, and according to the brief biography she had been given, rarely smiled. She would become Mrs. Blackthorne, hostess of charity galas, arm candy for business dinners, and eventually perhaps the mother of an heir if he wanted one. Lost in thought, she collided hard with someone coming around a bend in the path. "I'm so sorry." Strong hands steadied her shoulders, keeping her from stumbling backward. She looked up into the face of a man roughly her age, with dark hair that fell slightly over his forehead and striking green eyes that showed genuine concern. "My fault entirely," Willa said, catching her breath. "I wasn't watching where I was going. Neither was I." He smiled, and something about it made her heart skip in a way she hadn't expected. He was tall, well-built, wearing a simple gray sweater and jeans that somehow looked expensive without being showy. "Are you all right?" "Yes, perfectly fine." She tucked a strand of her light brown hair behind her ear, suddenly self-conscious. "Just had a lot on my mind. I know the feeling." He released her shoulders but didn't step away. "I'm Xavier, by the way, Xavier Sutton, Willa Thompson." They shook hands and his grip was warm and firm. "Well, Willa Thompson, since we nearly knocked each other over, would you let me buy you a coffee? There's a cart just up the path, and I promise to watch where I'm walking this time." She should have said no. She should have gone home to pack for the weekend trip to the Hamptons where she would finally meet her future husband. Instead, she found herself saying, "I'd like that." They walked together to the coffee cart, and Xavier ordered them both lattes without asking what she wanted. Somehow he got it right, extra foam and cinnamon. They sat on a bench overlooking the pond, and for the first time in weeks, Willa felt the knot in her chest loosen slightly. "So what had you so distracted?" Xavier asked, cradling his cup between his hands. "Family business," she said vaguely. "It's complicated. The best families usually are." He glanced at her with an understanding that suggested he knew something about complicated families himself. "I'm supposed to be working right now, actually. I have about 15 calls I should be returning and a presentation to review for tomorrow morning. But sometimes you need to just walk away from it all for an hour." "What do you do?" "Real estate development." He said it casually, without the usual pride or preening she associated with successful men in New York. "It's interesting work, but it can consume your life if you let it." "What about you?" "I studied chemistry in college. I was working at my father's pharmaceutical company until recently." She didn't mention that she had been laid off 2 months ago as part of the cost-cutting measures, or that her position had been eliminated entirely. They talked for over an hour, the conversation flowing easily from topic to topic. Xavier was funny without trying too hard, asking questions that showed he actually listened to her answers. He told her about growing up in Connecticut with 3 sisters, who had taught him to be outnumbered and outmaneuvered from a young age. She told him about her childhood dream of becoming a research scientist, about the trips to the Museum of Natural History with her mother before she passed away when Willa was 15. "I should probably get going," Willa finally said, though she didn't want to. The sun was starting to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. "Me too." Xavier stood, then hesitated. "Would you want to do this again? Maybe dinner sometime this week?" Willa's heart sank. "I can't, I'm actually engaged." The disappointment that flashed across his face was quickly masked. "Of course, I should have assumed someone like you would be taken. He's a lucky man. It's not like that." The words came out before she could stop them. "It's an arranged marriage, business." Xavier's eyebrows rose. "I didn't think people still did that. They do when millions of dollars are at stake." She stood, wrapping her arms around herself against the cooling air. "I'm sorry, I shouldn't have said anything. I really do need to go." "Willa, wait." He pulled out his phone. "Can I at least have your number? As a friend. You look like you could use one right now." She knew it was a terrible idea, but she took his phone and entered her number anyway. What harm could come from having someone to talk to? Someone who didn't know about the Thompson family legacy or Harrison Blackthorne's billions. They parted ways at the edge of the park, and Willa walked home feeling lighter than she had in months, even though guilt gnawed at her. She had no business feeling attracted to Xavier Sutton, not when she had just signed a contract promising herself to another man. That night, as she lay in bed, her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Thank you for the unexpected afternoon. I hope you find some peace with whatever you're facing. Your friend, Xavier." She stared at the message for a long time before responding. "Thank you for the coffee and conversation. It meant more than you know." The next morning, Willa packed a small suitcase for the Hamptons. Her father drove her out himself, unusually quiet during the 2-hour drive. The Blackthorne estate was exactly what she expected, sprawling, pristine, and cold. A housekeeper answered the door and led them to a sitting room with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the ocean. Harrison Blackthorne entered 15 minutes later, and Willa's stomach tightened. He was distinguished-looking with silver hair and sharp blue eyes, but there was a hardness to his face that made her want to step backward. He shook her father's hand first, then turned to her. "Willa, you're even lovelier than your photograph suggested." He took her hand and kissed it, a gesture that felt performative and outdated. "Welcome to your future home." "Thank you, Mr. Blackthorne. Please call me Harrison. We're to be married after all." He gestured to the sofa. "Sit. We have much to discuss." The next hour was one of the most uncomfortable of Willa's life. Harrison outlined his expectations for their marriage with the detachment of someone discussing a business merger, which she supposed this essentially was. She would attend events with him at least 3 times per week, host dinner parties once a month, and maintain a certain standard of appearance and behavior. In exchange, she would have access to a generous monthly allowance, a personal credit card, and living quarters in both the Hamptons house and his Manhattan penthouse. "I travel frequently for business," Harrison said, sipping scotch though it was barely noon. "So you'll have plenty of time to yourself. I'm not looking for a traditional marriage, Willa. I'm looking for a companion who understands what this arrangement truly is." "And what is it?" she asked quietly. "Mutually beneficial." He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. I get a beautiful, intelligent woman to silence the board members who think I need to settle down again. You get financial security and the prestige of the Blackthorn name. Your father gets the investment he needs. Everyone wins. Except no one mentioned love, Willa thought. But then again, she had known that going into this. She spent the rest of the weekend at the estate, dining with Harrison and his business associates, being shown the house and grounds, selecting a bedroom that would be hers alone. Harrison made it clear that, while he expected her to share his bed occasionally for appearances, he wouldn't demand anything she wasn't comfortable with. It should have been a relief, but instead, it just made everything feel even more transactional. On the drive back to Manhattan Sunday evening, her phone buzzed. "How was your weekend? I'm guessing you can't talk about it, but I hope you're doing okay. Xavier." She hadn't let herself think about him all weekend, but now his message opened something inside her chest that hurt. "It was exactly what I expected," she typed back. "How was yours? Boring presentations and conference calls. Though I did find a great new running route in Prospect Park. You mentioned you like to jog." They texted back and forth for the next hour, easy conversation that made her smile despite everything. When she got home, she found herself looking forward to his next message more than she should. Over the following weeks, Xavier became her lifeline. They texted daily, sometimes just funny observations about their days, sometimes deeper conversations about dreams and disappointments. He told her about a real estate deal that was falling apart because of a stubborn property owner who refused to sell the last parcel he needed. She told him about the guilt she felt over the arranged marriage, how she was grieving the loss of the future she had imagined for herself. "You don't have to go through with it," Xavier wrote one evening. "Yes, I do. My father's entire legacy depends on this." "What about your legacy? Your life?" She didn't have a good answer for that. 3 weeks after their first meeting, Xavier asked if she would meet him for lunch. Willa knew she shouldn't, but she agreed anyway. They met at a small Italian restaurant in the village, tucked into a corner booth where no one would notice them. "I've been looking forward to this all week," Xavier said, his eyes bright as she slid into the seat across from him. "Me too," Willa admitted, "though I probably shouldn't be here. You're allowed to have friends, aren't you?" "Yes, but we both know this isn't just friendship anymore." The words hung between them, honest and dangerous. Xavier reached across the table and took her hand. "You're right. I should have stayed away after I found out you were engaged. But Willa, I can't stop thinking about you. These past few weeks, getting to know you even just through texts, it's been the best part of my days." Her throat tightened. "I feel the same way, and that's why this is so unfair. In 6 weeks, I'm going to marry Harrison Blackthorn. I signed a contract. My father's company will go bankrupt if I back out now. There has to be another way." "There isn't." She pulled her hand back even though it hurt to break the contact. "I should go. Don't, please." His voice was rough with emotion. "Just give me today. One afternoon where we don't have to think about anything else. Can you do that?" She should have said no. Instead, she nodded. They ordered lunch but barely touched it, too wrapped up in conversation and stolen glances. After, they walked through Washington Square Park, their hands occasionally brushing as they moved in sync. Xavier told her about his dreams of developing affordable housing, projects that would actually help people instead of just generating profit. Willa talked about her research thesis on new antibiotic compounds, work she had abandoned when she started working for her father's company. "You could go back to it," Xavier said. "After you're married, research labs are always looking for talented chemists. Harrison expects me to be available for his social obligations. I don't think he'd be thrilled about me spending 60 hours a week in a lab." "Have you asked him?" "Not yet," she sighed. "To be honest, I've been avoiding thinking about the reality of what my life will actually be like. They ended up at his apartment in Tribeca, not planning it but both knowing where they were headed. Xavier made coffee while Willa looked at the photographs on his walls, landscapes and cityscapes that showed an artist's eye. "You took these?" she asked. "Photography is my hobby." Or it was, before work started consuming all my time. He handed her a mug and stood beside her, close enough that she could feel the warmth of his body. "That one's from Iceland. I went there 2 years ago and barely wanted to come back. It's beautiful." She turned to look at him and found him already watching her. "Willa." Her name was barely a whisper. "I know I have no right to say this, but I'm falling in love with you." Tears stung her eyes. "Xavier, don't. I can't help it." He set down his coffee and cupped her face gently. "Tell me you don't feel this too and I'll walk away. I'll delete your number and never contact you again. But if you feel even a fraction of what I'm feeling, tell me, please." "I do feel it," she whispered. "God help me, I do." He kissed her then, soft and desperate and full of everything they both wanted but couldn't have. Willa kissed him back, her hands fisting in his sweater, her heart breaking and soaring at the same time. It was everything a first kiss should be, and everything it shouldn't be because she belonged to someone else now. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Xavier rested his forehead against hers. "Come away with me. This weekend. Just 2 days where we can pretend the rest of the world doesn't exist." "I can't. Harrison wants me at a charity gala on Saturday. Then Friday. Just 1 day." His thumb traced her cheekbone. "Please, Willa, I'm not asking for forever. I know I can't have that, but give me 1 day." She knew it was selfish and wrong, but she nodded. 1 day. They spent Friday in upstate New York, driving up to a small inn near the Catskills that Xavier had found online. They hiked through forests painted in autumn colors, ate at a diner where no one knew who they were, and talked for hours about everything and nothing. That night, in a room overlooking a lake, they made love like two people who knew their time was running out. "I wish I had met you a year ago," Willa said afterward, lying in Xavier's arms. "Before everything fell apart with my family's company, before Harrison Blackthorne. I wish that too." He kissed her hair. "But I'm not sorry I know you now, even if it's just for a little while." "What if we ran away together, just disappeared?" Xavier was quiet for a long moment. "Could you live with knowing your father lost everything because of you, that your family's legacy was destroyed?" "No," she admitted. "I couldn't. I know." He held her tighter. "And that's one of the reasons I love you. You're loyal and brave, even when it costs you everything." They drove back to the city early Saturday morning, knowing they couldn't be seen together. Xavier dropped her off 3 blocks from her apartment, and they sat in his car for 10 minutes, neither wanting to be the first to let go. "I'll still be here," Xavier said finally. "As your friend, if that's all we can be. I won't disappear unless you want me to. I don't want you to." Willa kissed him one last time. "But maybe we need some distance, for both our sakes. Maybe." He didn't sound convinced. Willa threw herself into wedding preparations over the next 3 weeks, trying to drown out thoughts of Xavier with endless decisions about flowers and menus and seating charts. Harrison was rarely involved, leaving most of the planning to his assistant and telling Willa to choose whatever she liked. The wedding would be small by Billionaire standards, just 200 guests at his Hamptons estate, followed by a honeymoon in Monaco that would be cut short because Harrison had business in Singapore. She and Xavier exchanged occasional texts, keeping things light and friendly, but the longing underneath every message was almost unbearable. He told her about finally closing his real estate deal after offering the holdout owner twice what the property was worth. She told him about finding the perfect dress for the wedding, a custom Vera Wang that made her look like a princess in a fairy tale with the wrong ending. 2 weeks before the wedding, Harrison threw an engagement party at his Manhattan penthouse. Willa played her part perfectly, smiling and gracious as she met his business associates and society friends. She wore the diamond necklace Harrison had given her, along with the engagement ring that weighed heavy on her finger with its ostentatious 5-carat stone. She was standing on the balcony, taking a break from the forced conversations when her phone buzzed. "I hope you're surviving whatever you're doing tonight, Xavier." She shouldn't respond, but she found herself typing back. "Engagement party. Currently hiding on the balcony and wishing I could teleport anywhere else. I'm at a dinner meeting that's just as awful. Want to make a break for it together." She smiled despite herself. "Don't tempt me. Tempting you is becoming my specialty." Before she could respond, someone cleared their throat behind her. She turned to find Harrison's business partner, Richard Crawford, watching her with interest. He was in his 40s, handsome in a slick way that made her uncomfortable. "Texting someone more interesting than us?" Richard asked, moving to stand beside her at the railing. "Just a friend." Willa pocketed her phone. "Harrison's a lucky man, you know. You're much younger and more beautiful than either of his previous wives." "That's kind of you to say." Richard moved closer. "Between you and me, I give this marriage 2 years before you realize what a cold bastard he really is. When that happens, give me a call. I'd be happy to keep you company." Disgust roiled through her stomach. "I think I need to get back to the party." She escaped inside, her hands shaking. Was this what her life was going to be? Fending off her husband's friends while playing trophy wife at endless events. The walls felt like they were closing in. She found Harrison holding court with a group of investors, barely noticing when she slipped past him to the bathroom. She locked the door and leaned against it, fighting the panic rising in her chest. Her phone buzzed again. "You okay? You stopped responding." "Xavier." She called him without thinking, needing to hear his voice. "Hey," he answered immediately. "What's wrong?" "Everything." Her voice cracked. "I can't do this, Xavier. I thought I could, but I can't marry him." "Then don't. Walk away right now. Your father would want you to be happy, not miserable. You don't understand. This is his life's work, his father's legacy." "And what about your life, your legacy?" Xavier's voice was urgent. "Willa, listen to me. I've been thinking about this constantly for weeks. What if I invested in your father's company? I have capital, I have connections. We could find another solution." "Xavier, it's $20 million. I know, and I can get it." There was something in his voice she hadn't heard before, a certainty that made her pause. "What are you saying?" He was quiet for a moment. "I need to tell you something. Something I should have told you at the beginning, but I was enjoying being just Xavier with you." Not Xavier Sutton, CEO of Sutton Development Corporation. The name hit her like a punch. Sutton Development Corporation was one of the largest real estate development companies on the East Coast, worth billions. She had read articles about Xavier Sutton, the young CEO who had taken over his family's company at 28 and turned it into an empire, but she had never seen his picture. He was notoriously private, avoiding media attention. "You're the billionaire," she said slowly. "Yes." "I was going to tell you, but then you mentioned the arranged marriage and I realized we were both trapped by money in different ways. With you, I could just be me. Not the CEO, not the Sutton heir, just Xavier." Willa's mind was reeling. "Why didn't you say something?" "Would it have changed anything? You still would have been engaged to Harrison. I still would have been falling in love with you. But you could have helped. You had the money all along. And you would have felt obligated to me instead of Harrison. I didn't want that." His voice softened. "I want you to choose me because you love me, not because I can write a check. But if money is the only thing keeping you from walking away from him, then I'm offering it. Loan, investment, gift, I don't care what we call it. Just don't marry him, Willa. Please. There was knocking on the bathroom door. Willa, are you in there? Harrison's assistant. I have to go, she whispered. Can we meet tomorrow? I need to think. Of course, I'll text you. She ended the call and opened the door, plastering on a smile as Harrison's assistant ushered her back to the party. The rest of the evening passed in a blur. She smiled and laughed and accepted congratulations while her mind spun with Xavier's revelation and offer. That night, she couldn't sleep. She pulled out the contract she had signed with Harrison, reading through the clauses she had barely paid attention to before. There was a penalty clause for breaking the engagement, a payment of $5 million to compensate for the investment he had already made in Thompson Pharmaceuticals. She called her father at 6 in the morning. Willa, what's wrong? He sounded groggy, worried. Dad, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me. If there was another way to save the company, would you still want me to marry Harrison? There was a long pause. What are you saying? I'm saying I don't love him. I'll never love him. And I've met someone else, someone I think I could build a real life with. The words poured out of her. Someone who's offering to help us. Willa. Her father's voice was heavy. I never wanted to force you into this. When Harrison approached me with his offer, I thought it was the only option. I convinced myself you'd be comfortable, secure, that money could make up for the lack of love. But your mother would never forgive me for sacrificing your happiness to save her father's company. Tears streamed down Willa's face. So if there was another investor, then I'd tell you to run from Harrison Blackthorne as fast as you could. She met Xavier the next morning at a coffee shop in Brooklyn, far from anyone who might recognize either of them. He stood when she entered, his face tense with hope and fear. I'll do it, Willa said as soon as she sat down, but on one condition, anything. The investment in my father's company comes from you as a business deal, not because of me. It has to be legitimate, separate from us. I need to know I'm choosing you for the right reasons, not because you're my white knight with a checkbook. Xavier's smile was brilliant. Done. I'll have my business team review Thompson Pharmaceuticals this week. If the fundamentals are sound, which I'm betting they are, we'll structure a proper investment deal. But Willa, I need you to know something. Even if your father turns down my investment, even if you're not financially tied to Harrison anymore, I still want you to be sure about us. This isn't just me trying to win you. This is real. I know. She reached across the table and took his hand. I think I knew it was real that first day in the park. I just was too scared to admit it. Breaking her engagement to Harrison was one of the hardest things Willa had ever done. She met with him 2 days later, with her father by her side for support. Harrison took the news with barely a flicker of emotion, which somehow made it worse. I see, he said when she finished explaining. And this other investor your father has found, I assume he's the real reason you're backing out. There's someone else, Willa admitted. But even if there wasn't, I couldn't marry you, Harrison. It wouldn't be fair to either of us. I'm disappointed, Willa. I thought you understood what this arrangement was. He turned to her father. I assume you have the $5 million for the penalty clause. We'll work something out, Gregory said firmly. In the end, Xavier's investment made the penalty irrelevant. His business team spent a week reviewing Thompson Pharmaceuticals and emerged with a $25 million offer for a 30% stake in the company. It was more than fair, more than Gregory had hoped for. The deal was structured professionally, with board oversight and performance benchmarks, exactly what Willa had asked for. Harrison accepted his $5 million penalty payment and moved on to his next business deal without apparent regret. Willa heard through mutual acquaintances that he was already pursuing another young woman from a financially struggling family. With the weight of the arranged marriage finally lifted, Willa felt like she could breathe again. She and Xavier took things slowly, dating properly now without the shadow of her engagement hanging over them. He took her to the theater, to quiet dinners in restaurants where they could talk for hours, to his sister's house in Connecticut, where his family welcomed her with open arms. "They love you," Xavier said on the drive back to the city after Sunday dinner with his family. "Almost as much as I do." "Almost," Willa teased, lacing her fingers through his. "Well, I've had more practice." He brought her hand to his lips. "Though to be fair, I haven't actually said those words properly yet. I love you, Willa Thompson. I loved you the moment you crashed into me in Central Park, I think. I just didn't know it yet. I love you too." She leaned over and kissed his cheek. "And I'm so grateful I ran into you that day. Literally. Best collision of my life." 3 months later, Willa started a new job as a research chemist at a lab in Manhattan, working on exactly the kind of projects she had dreamed about in graduate school. Xavier supported her fully, proud of her work even when it meant late nights and weekend hours in the lab. They moved in together that spring, finding a brownstone in Brooklyn that needed work, but had character and space for both of them. Xavier taught Willa about real estate development as they renovated together, and she taught him about chemistry when he asked questions about her research. "I never thought I could have this," Willa said one evening as they painted the kitchen. She was covered in off-white paint, and Xavier had somehow gotten a streak of it in his hair. "A real partnership with someone who sees me as an equal, not a possession or a burden." Xavier set down his paintbrush and pulled her close, heedless of the paint transferring between them. "You're my partner in everything, Willa, and you're going to be my wife if you'll have me." "Is that a proposal?" Her heart hammered. "Not yet. When I propose, it's going to be perfect. I'm just giving you advance warning." He grinned. "Though if you want to save me the suspense and just say yes now, I'd be okay with that." "Ask me properly and find out," she challenged. He did, 2 months later during a weekend trip to Iceland. They were standing in front of a waterfall he had photographed on his first trip, the one she had admired in his apartment what felt like a lifetime ago. Xavier got down on one knee in the mist, holding up a ring he had designed himself, a simple platinum band with a sapphire the color of her eyes. "Willa Thompson, you crashed into my life when I least expected it and most needed it. You're brilliant and brave and stubborn as hell, and I want to spend the rest of my life proving that I'm worthy of you. Will you marry me?" "Yes," she said, pulling him up to kiss him. "Yes, absolutely yes." They married 8 months later in a small ceremony at his family's estate in Connecticut, surrounded by people who actually loved them. Willa's father walked her down the aisle with tears in his eyes, whispering that her mother would have adored Xavier. The ceremony was simple and heartfelt, nothing like the spectacle her wedding to Harrison would have been. "I promise to love you in all the ways that matter," Xavier said during his vows, his voice steady despite the emotion in his eyes. "To support your dreams, to challenge you when you need it, to stand beside you through whatever comes. You're my unexpected miracle, and I'll never stop being grateful that we collided that day in Central Park." Willa's own vows were just as heartfelt. "I promise to choose you every day, not because I have to, but because I want to. Because you see me for who I really am and love me anyway. You saved me from a life I didn't want and gave me a life I never dared to dream of. I love you, Xavier Sutton, and I always will." Their honeymoon was 2 weeks in Iceland, retracing the steps Xavier had taken on his first trip and making new memories together. They hiked to hidden waterfalls, soaked in natural hot springs, and stayed up late to watch the northern lights dance across the sky. "I want to bring our kids here someday," Willa said one night, wrapped in Xavier's arms as they watched the aurora. "Show them how beautiful the world can be. Our kids." Xavier's smile was evident in his voice. "Eventually, if you want them. I want everything with you." He kissed the top of her head. "A dozen kids if you want, though maybe we start with one or two and see how we handle it." "Deal." They settled into married life with surprising ease. Both kept their careers, supporting each other through busy seasons and celebrating each other's successes. Thompson Pharmaceuticals flourished with Xavier's investment, eventually developing a breakthrough antibiotic that Willa had contributed research to before leaving. Her father made sure she received credit for her early work, and she found herself featured in scientific journals alongside her current lab research. 2 years after their wedding, Willa discovered she was pregnant. Xavier cried when she told him, overwhelmed with joy and terror in equal measure. Their daughter, Emma, was born on a snowy December morning, perfect and healthy and immediately beloved by everyone who met her. "She has your eyes," Xavier said, holding Emma carefully as Willa rested in the hospital bed. "Look at that. She's already got me wrapped around her finger." "Good practice for when she's a teenager," Willa teased. Emma was followed by a son, Noah, 2 years later. Xavier proved to be an involved, loving father, adjusting his work schedule to be present for school events and bedtimes. Willa eventually transitioned to part-time research work, wanting more time with their children while they were young but not willing to give up her career entirely. "You're doing an amazing job balancing it all," Xavier told her one evening after a particularly chaotic day where she had presented research findings in the morning and hosted a birthday party for Emma in the afternoon. "I'm surviving," Willa said, collapsing onto the couch beside him. "Though I couldn't do it without you. We're a team." He pulled her close. "Always." On their 5th wedding anniversary, they returned to Central Park, bringing Emma and Noah to the exact spot where Willa had crashed into Xavier. Emma, now 3, ran ahead on the path while Xavier carried Noah. "Do you ever think about what would have happened if I had just kept walking that day?" Willa asked, watching their daughter chase falling leaves. "I try not to." Xavier shifted Noah to his other arm. "Because the thought of missing out on this, on you, on them, is too painful to imagine." "I was on my way to marry Harrison Blackthorne," Willa said quietly. "I had just signed the contract. I was so lost and miserable, and then you appeared and everything changed. It changed for me too." Xavier caught Emma as she ran back to them, lifting her up to sit on his shoulders alongside his hold on Noah. "I was sleepwalking through my life, focusing on work and not much else. You woke me up." They walked the same path they had taken on that first day, this time with their children, their hands linked when not needed to wrangle toddlers. Willa thought about the scared woman she had been, willing to sacrifice her happiness for duty and obligation. She thought about Xavier, the stranger who had become her soulmate, who had seen her clearly from the beginning and loved what he saw. "Mommy, why are you crying?" Emma asked, noticing the tears on Willa's cheeks. "Happy tears, sweetheart." Willa wiped them away. "Just thinking about how lucky I am." That night, after the children were asleep, Xavier pulled out a gift for their anniversary. It was a photograph he had secretly taken on their honeymoon in Iceland. Willa standing in front of the waterfall where he had proposed, her face tilted up to the sky with pure joy written across her features. He had had it printed and framed, with a small plaque at the bottom that read where our forever began. "It's perfect," Willa said, tracing the frame with her fingers. "We should hang it in the living room, right next to the one from Central Park." He had that photograph too, taken by a stranger a few months after they started dating, both of them laughing at some joke Willa couldn't even remember now. It hung in their home as a reminder of where everything started. They made love that night with the tenderness of people who had built something real together, who knew each other's bodies and hearts completely. Afterward, wrapped in each other's arms, Willa reflected on the journey that had brought her here. "You know what the strangest part is?" she said into the darkness. "I thought I was arranging to marry a billionaire, to solve all my family's problems with one sacrifice. And then I crashed into a stranger who turned out to be the billionaire who actually saved everything, just in a completely different way." "The universe has a sense of humor," Xavier agreed, "though I prefer to think of it as fate. Fate brought us together, absolutely. You were always meant to be mine, Willa. Even when you were walking toward the wrong man, you were walking toward me too. We just had to collide first." He kissed her forehead. "Best accident that ever happened to me. Best accident that ever happened to both of us." Years later, when Emma and Noah were old enough to understand, they told their children the story of how they met. Emma was delighted by the romance of it, while Noah was more interested in the fact that his parents had literally crashed into each other. "So if Mom hadn't been sad that day, you never would have met?" Emma asked. "Maybe not," Xavier admitted. "Or maybe we would have met some other way. I like to think we were always going to find each other." "That's so romantic," Emma sighed, already showing signs of her mother's practical nature mixed with her father's optimism. "It is romantic," Willa agreed, "but the real romance isn't how we met. It's everything that came after. It's choosing each other every day, even when things are hard. It's building a life together. And crashing into each other on the way to the grocery store," Noah added helpfully, making everyone laugh. Thompson Pharmaceuticals continued to thrive, eventually becoming one of the most respected pharmaceutical companies in the country. Gregory Thompson retired at 65, proud of what he had built and preserved. He spent his retirement doting on his grandchildren and traveling to all the places his late wife had dreamed of visiting. "You saved everything," he told Willa on her 35th birthday, Emma and Noah playing with new toys in the background while the family celebrated. "Not just the company. You saved yourself from a life that would have destroyed you. I'm so proud of you." "I'm proud of us," Willa said, hugging him. "We found our way through it together." Xavier's company continued to grow as well, but he made sure to maintain balance, never letting work consume him the way it had before he met Willa. He developed several affordable housing projects that earned both profit and praise, fulfilling the dream he had told Willa about all those years ago in Washington Square Park. On their 10th anniversary, Xavier planned a surprise trip back to Iceland. They left Emma and Noah with his parents and flew to Reykjavik, renting a car to drive to all the places they had visited on their honeymoon. 10 years, Willa said as they stood once again in front of the waterfall where Xavier had proposed. "It feels like forever and like no time at all. Best 10 years of my life." Xavier pulled her close. "Thank you for saying yes. Thank you for asking. Thank you for being patient with me when I was engaged to someone else. Thank you for offering to help without making it about us." She looked up at him. "Thank you for seeing me, always." He kissed her softly. "I'll always see you, Willa. You're the most important thing in my world." They renewed their vows right there at the waterfall, just the two of them and a photographer Xavier had secretly hired. It wasn't legally necessary, but it felt right to reaffirm their commitment in the place where their engagement had begun. The years continued to pass, bringing the normal joys and challenges of any marriage. They argued about parenting decisions and money, and whose turn it was to handle school pickups. They supported each other through career setbacks and family losses. They celebrated birthdays and holidays and ordinary Tuesday evenings at home. Through it all, the foundation they had built remained solid. Emma grew into a teenager who inherited her mother's love of science and her father's business acumen. She talked about becoming a biotechnology entrepreneur, wanting to bridge both her parents' worlds. Noah discovered a passion for architecture, spending hours sketching buildings and studying design. "We made pretty great kids," Xavier said one evening, watching their children work on homework at the kitchen table. "We really did." Willa leaned against him. "Do you ever wonder what your life would have been like if we hadn't met?" "Sometimes. But I don't like those thoughts, so I shut them down quickly." He wrapped his arm around her waist. "This is the only life I want, the only one that makes sense. Even though I crashed into you and complicated everything. Especially because you crashed into me and complicated everything." He turned her to face him. "You're my favorite complication, Willa Sutton." She kissed him, aware of their children groaning in the background about their parents being embarrassing, not caring at all. This was her life, the one she never could have imagined when she was signing that contract to marry Harrison Blackthorne. This was better than anything she could have planned or arranged. On their 15th anniversary, Willa and Xavier returned to Central Park with Emma and Noah, now 13 and 11. They walked the familiar paths, telling the story again of that first collision that had changed everything. "So this is where it all started," Emma said, standing in the spot her parents had indicated. "This is it," Willa confirmed. "Right here, I ran into your father and everything changed." "What would you tell yourself if you could go back?" Noah asked. "Like, if you could talk to past you in that moment." Willa thought about it carefully. "I'd tell myself to trust the feeling I had when I looked into your father's eyes. I'd tell myself that sometimes the universe sends you exactly what you need exactly when you need it, even if it seems impossible. I'd tell myself to be brave enough to choose love over obligation. I'd tell myself to get her number immediately and never let her go," Xavier added, making Emma roll her eyes fondly. "You're both so cheesy," she said, but she was smiling. They took a family photo at that spot, all four of them together, marking 15 years since the collision that had started everything. Willa looked at her family, her real family built on love and choice and commitment, and felt overwhelming gratitude. That evening, after Emma and Noah had gone to their rooms, Xavier pulled Willa onto the balcony of their Brooklyn brownstone. The city stretched out before them, lights twinkling in the darkness. "I have something for you," he said, producing a small wrapped box. Inside was a necklace with a charm in the shape of two stars colliding, creating a burst of light where they intersected. It was beautiful and perfect, and exactly the kind of thoughtful gift Xavier always gave. "For the woman who crashed into me and changed my universe," he said as he fastened it around her neck. "I love it." Willa touched the charm. "I love you. I love you too. Always have, always will." They stood together in the cool evening air, comfortable in the silence of two people who knew each other completely. Willa thought about the journey that had brought her here, from that desperate day in Central Park to this moment of perfect contentment. She had been prepared to sacrifice everything for duty, to marry a man she didn't love to save her family. Instead, she had collided with a stranger who had become her soulmate, who had saved her family in a different way while winning her heart. Xavier had never been the billionaire she was arranged to marry, but he had been the billionaire she was meant to find. The universe had conspired to put them in the same place at the same time, two people on separate paths that had suddenly merged into one. "What are you thinking about?" Xavier asked, feeling her shift against him. "About how different everything could have been, about how grateful I am for every choice that led me to you." She turned to face him. "About how I would crash into you 1,000 times over if it meant ending up exactly here." "Same," he said simply, and kissed her. Their children would eventually grow up and move on to their own lives and loves. Emma would indeed become a biotechnology entrepreneur, founding a company that specialized in antibiotic research, continuing her mother's work in a new way. Noah would become an architect, designing affordable housing projects in partnership with his father's company, carrying on Xavier's vision. But in this moment, standing on their balcony with the city spread before them, Willa and Xavier were just two people who had found each other against all odds. He was the stranger who had become her soulmate, the unexpected answer to a question she hadn't known how to ask. She was the woman who had crashed into his life and shown him what love could really be, years later, when they were old and gray, sitting on the porch of a house they had bought in Connecticut to be closer to their grandchildren. They would still tell the story of how they met. How Willa had been walking toward a loveless arranged marriage when she literally collided with the man she was meant to love. How Xavier had been the billionaire all along, but that wasn't why she fell in love with him. "It was always your heart," she would tell him, holding his hand, their fingers intertwined as they had been for decades. "Your kindness, your humor, the way you saw me as a person and not a commodity, that's what I fell in love with." "And I fell in love with your strength," he would respond, as he always did. "Your intelligence, your loyalty, your beautiful smile, the money never mattered. We mattered." Their grandchildren would listen to the story with the same rapt attention their children had, believing in the magic of it, the impossibility that had become reality. And Willa and Xavier would exchange glances over the heads of the next generation, communicating without words as only two people who had spent a lifetime together could. They had been lucky, incredibly lucky, to find each other when they did. Willa had been arranged to marry a billionaire, completely unaware that the stranger she crashed into in Central Park would become her soulmate, her partner, her everything. The contract she had signed with Harrison Blackthorne had seemed like the end of her story, but it had actually been the catalyst for her real beginning. Sometimes the universe has a plan that's better than anything we could arrange for ourselves. Sometimes we have to be willing to crash into the unexpected and see where it leads us. And sometimes, if we're very lucky, the stranger we collide with turns out to be exactly the person we were always meant to find. Willa Thompson had learned that lesson the day she ran into Xavier Sutton in Central Park. She had been running from one future and straight into another, better one. And every day since then, she had chosen love over obligation, joy over duty, Xavier over anyone else. It was, she reflected in those golden years, the best collision of her life. And she would crash into him again and again in every lifetime if it meant having what they had built together. A real marriage, a real partnership, a real love story that had started with two strangers on a path in Central Park and had grown into something beautiful and lasting and true. That was the magic of it. Not the money, not the dramatic rescue from an arranged marriage, but the simple fact that they had found each other when they both needed it most. That they had chosen each other every day since. That they had built a life together full of love and laughter and children and memories that would last long after they were gone. Xavier had been a billionaire, yes. But more importantly, he had been the right man at the right time, in exactly the right place. And Willa had been brave enough to recognize it, to choose it, to crash into it head first and never look back. That was their story, beginning to end, collision to forever.